Hey, welcome back to Justin's Arcade. Today I am putting out a repair video for my Galaxian cabinet. This board had some issues with colors on the screen, so this video is just going to go over the diagnosis process and the steps I took to repair it. The first thing I like to do is pull the PCB out of the cabinet and hook it up on the workbench with a JAMA supergun. And I just want to rule out that anything in the cabinet isn't causing the issue, like the power supply or the CRT itself. So here on the left you can see the PCB running on the workbench, and that's compared to an emulation on MAME on the right. And one thing that's great about MAME is, in addition to being able to play games, it's a really great documentation on how the hardware works. So by comparing the two, you can see already the color on several of the words is wrong, and at the top of the screen the high scores are not visible. And once you get into some gameplay, you can see it illustrated even better. Most of the tiles and sprites on the screen either have wrong colors or are missing colors altogether. Alright, so here's the board. So the first thing I did is some Googling, and I noticed online there's a test ROM you can get. And that actually there's a bunch of different versions of this test ROM you can download and burn to a chip. And you can pop that into socket, I think it's 7F. If you pull out the daughter board here, you can pop this in, run that, and that'll do some diagnostics on the board and tell you what's wrong. I think it tests the RAM, sprite RAM, a few other things. So I did that, popped that in there, ran it. When I turned on the board, it didn't look like it was doing anything. The screen was completely black, and later on I figured out why that was. By running this ROM in MAME, I could see what it was doing, and on the screen it displays in text, yellow text specifically, that it's testing ROM and RAM and all that stuff, and yellow happens to be the color that I couldn't see anyways. So at the end of the test, I saw that it would put sprites on the screen and kind of drop them down in a loop. And on my board I could see some pixels flying by, so I knew it was running the tests and getting through everything, but because all the text of this particular ROM was in yellow, and that's the color I couldn't see anything on my screen. But that's a good place to start, and because I knew it got to the end of the test, I knew that the various RAM and sprite RAM and all that kind of stuff was probably okay. From there I did some more Googling, and just looking for graphics issues, and one of the things that people said fail often is the sprite RAM over here. It's on T through N, and I ran the test and didn't say there was an error, but they said that these 5 chips often fail on here because of heat issues, and 4 of the 5 of my chips, I think, were missing the heatsink. The heatsink had fallen off, so I thought, well, I might try to replace those chips. Just to see if that's the issue. Those chips are kind of hard to get now, like any of these old chips, but I did find this replacement board that you can build from Marco's Arcade. It's just a PCB you can get printed wherever you get your PCBs printed, and you can source some of these parts and you can solder them all together and build this thing, and this allows you to replace 4 of the 5 sprite RAMs with a modern sprite RAM chip, depending on what position you put it on in the board. So I ordered those parts, got it together, I tried it in the different positions and all the different permutations of the sprite RAMs that I had, because it only does 4 of the 5. And I had the exact same symptoms. The game would run, but it was missing most of the yellows on the screen. In hindsight, I probably should have realized that wasn't going to fix my issue, and the reason I know that is because a couple years ago I wrote an emulator for Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man, and that hardware is kind of similar to Galaxian. These old games didn't have enough CPU power to manually paint every pixel on the screen, so they often came with hardware on the board for manipulating sprites. And if it was something with the sprite RAM that was wrong, I should have seen just the sprites having an issue. All the ships at the top of the screen are actually based on background tiles. Because Galaxian only supports, I think it's like 7 sprites, all of the ships that are at the top before they're flying down are not sprites yet. They only turn into sprites once they start moving. So the fact that all of the tiles up at the top of the screen and all of the words on the attract mode at the that those were not the right colors. That should have been indicated to me that it's not just something with a sprite RAM. But it's a cool little upgrade, and kind of future proofs the board in case my sprite RAMs have an issue going forward. After that, I just kind of did a little more Googling and just kind of for screen issues, and I found that 6L here is a bipolar ROM for colors. It does a lot of stuff with the colors, and I thought, hey, I'll just replace that. Same thing, these are hard to get, but they do make a replacement kit. Arcadecabinets.com has a 82S123 to 27512 adapter that you can get for this to replace that. And I got those parts. Again, built that up, put it on here, didn't fix the issue. So at that point, I thought, well, I should just stop trying random things and get out the troubleshooting guide. A lot of these old games came with the full schematics and documentation on what to look for when you're troubleshooting things. And you can just kind of go through here and read the symptoms and what chip it is and location, what might be the problem. And that's where I found this one here. It says gameplays, driving objects, invaders, letters, and numbers are the wrong color. So that seemed promising. That's a 74LS00 at position 2S. And so if you look down here at position 2S, that's this chip. And when I started looking at that chip close up, what I noticed was it's hard to see unless you have the board in the right light. It looked like someone had previously circled this with a pin or something, and it's super faded now, but if you get it just the right light, you can see that it's circled. So my thought was someone had diagnosed this board before, found that this chip was an issue, and just hadn't gotten around to fixing it. So that was pretty promising for me, a lead to look after. The chip itself is if you Google this, you can see that it's a quad 2-input NAND gate. So it has 4 NAND gates inside of it, and each NAND gate has 2 input pins and an output pin. And I don't have a logic analyzer or anything, and I haven't invested in one yet, but a NAND gate should be easy enough to test because you just have the 2 inputs and the outputs, and you can look at your table to see, a NAND gate should always have a high output unless both of its inputs are also high. In that case, it should be low. So by getting out my multimeter, connecting this one chip up to 5 volts, and using the pin to measure, I should be able to see the output is high with no inputs. And that wasn't the case. So that indicated, yeah, this chip is probably bad. So I desoldered it from the board, and just for fun, I built a little test rig here on a breadboard where the red LEDs are outputs for each of the gates and the black wires are inputs. So I could move the wires from high to low, and I could see the different states of each of the NAND gates. So I got that chip on there, and that confirmed what I saw with the multimeter, that nothing on that chip was working properly. So I went ahead and ordered just an assortment of logic chips in here, which contains the chip that I needed, which was the 74LS00. I tested that again on my test board just to kind of sanity check that it did work the way I thought it would, and connecting the 2 highs made it go low, and having the 2 lows made it remain high. So that was a good sanity check. So I plopped that on the board. Surely that was going to be the issue. And unfortunately it wasn't. And at this point I was a little disappointed because I'd already built 2 different boards and went through this manual and found this chip, and that wasn't it. So at that point I did give up. I went ahead and sent the board in to a guy I found on eBay, and he did a really good job. Sent it back really quickly, and I was a little bit disappointed again because if I had spent just a little bit more time in the manual, I would have found the same thing he found, which was 6M. And I believe this chip is flip-flops, or like an 8-bit register. And it says gameplays, no invaders, letters, or numbers. And I probably stopped reading right there because it didn't say color in the first line. But right here it says effects color ROM 6L. So he replaced that chip, which is over here, 6M. And basically both of those 2 things fixed the issue. So I probably should have just read through this a second at a time, and I probably would have found that myself. But, It was still a good project because I got a lot of experience doing soldering, especially on these daughter boards that I built. I socketed them all on the board too, so you can remove it. I don't know, it's probably upwards of 100 pins to desolder and resolder. So I got a ton of experience there and didn't ruin the board in the process. So that's always good for your confidence. Good practice on soldering. So that's it. With those 2 chips replaced, that solved my issue. So basically a recap, if you're testing your board, get a test ROM, burn that, and put it in 7F to begin with, and that might solve your problems right away or identify what the issue is. If it's not that, if it's anything to do with the sprites, specifically when the ships are coming down from the formation at the top of the screen, when they're sprites, might be your sprite RAM. If it's colors, it could be your color P ROM or any of these 2 logic chips or anything else in the guide here that talks about color. And there's pages and pages of these you have to read through, and just read them carefully because you might run into the same thing I did where you replace a bunch and you miss just one. But I hope that helps you diagnose your board, and I'll catch you in the next video.